Hi, I'm Colin Mitchell with the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. I've been working as an avalanche forecaster, ski patroller, and guide and riding snowmobiles in the mountains for many years. The Know Before You Go program is about enjoying the mountains and coming home safely at the end of the day. We couldn't do this alone. I want to thank all of the partners that helped us bring you this life-saving presentation. Please remember, this is not an avalanche course. The goal of this presentation is to make you aware that avalanches are a hazard in the mountains. Please consider taking a field-based avalanche course to learn the basics of avalanche safety and how to manage your risk. This presentation will not do that. So, who needs to know about avalanches? Well, anyone who goes on or near snow-covered slopes is potentially exposed to avalanche hazard. Here are some sobering statistics. Avalanches kill around 30 people on average each year in the United States. While some states see more avalanches than others, avalanches can kill people anywhere with snow-covered mountains. Around 25% of these fatalities are snowmobilers or snow bikers, and the percentage of avalanche involvements with this group continues to rise. Between 2009 and 2019, snow machiners accounted for 32% of avalanche fatalities nationwide. The majority of avalanche victims die from asphyxiation. Many other fatalities are attributed to injuries suffered during the avalanche. Even with proper rescue gear, 1/4 of all fatal victims will die from trauma. So how do we combat these grim statistics? Avalanches that catch backcountry travelers are seldom random events. In 90% of accidents, the avalanche was initiated by the victim or someone in their group. This is good news for us because it means we have some measure of control over whether or not we are caught. Learning about avalanches can seem daunting at first, but there is a systematic, step-by-step way to avoid becoming an avalanche victim. It starts with some basic knowledge about avalanches and the development of a set of rituals and good habits to minimize our risk when we travel in the backcountry. What is an avalanche? In simplest terms, it is snow sliding down a mountainside. Avalanches come in different types. They can be loose snow avalanches, composed of individual grains of snow sliding down the mountainside and gaining size and volume as they descend, or they can be slab avalanches, where a portion of the snowpack breaks off of the slope as a unit. Avalanches can occur in both wet and dry snow. The most dangerous and unpredictable avalanches are dry slab avalanches. These occur when a cohesive plate of snow collapses above a weaker layer, shatters like a pane of glass, and slides down the mountainside. In this video, you will see the slab shatter and quickly accelerate down the slope. These avalanches are very difficult to escape because it feels like someone has pulled the rug out from under you. In some cases, you can get off the moving slab by accelerating toward the side at a 45-degree angle. Or, if you are near the top of the avalanche, you may be able to dig into the bed surface as the avalanche washes by you. You can try to grab a tree on the way down, but you must do this quickly. Once you start to pick up speed, trees become very dangerous obstacles. Bottom line, it is very difficult to escape a slab avalanche. Avalanche terrain is easy to identify when there is an avalanche on it. But what defines avalanche terrain when there is no obvious evidence? Terrain steepness, vegetation clues like broken trees, unexplained clearings, or lack of vegetation under steep slopes, as well as historical evidence, all provide clues. Some avalanche terrain is big and obvious, like in the photo on the upper right, but at other times it is not. Although larger terrain produces larger avalanches, slopes do not have to be super steep, big, or gnarly to be risky. They just need to be steep enough to slide and have snow cover. Steepness is the most important terrain factor. Most slab avalanches occur on slopes between 35 and 50 degrees. Slopes less than 30 degrees are usually not steep enough to slide, and slopes steeper than 50 degrees generally slough often enough that slabs cannot form. For reference, a black diamond slope at a ski area is about 35 to 40 degrees. When thinking about slope angle, it is not just the slope you are on. The slopes above and connected to you are important too. For example, you may be standing on a 30-degree slope, which would rarely slide on its own, but you could trigger a slide in an adjacent, steeper slope from this very spot. A collapse you cause can propagate outward to the steeper slope and trigger an avalanche, which could pull the slope you are on down with it. Here are 4 examples of avalanches triggered by people who were relatively far from the avalanche itself. In this video, a dry slab avalanche is triggered with an explosive by an avalanche mitigation team. Notice how far the avalanche fracture travels from the point where it was triggered. The nature and shape of the terrain can affect the outcome of an avalanche. Ultimately, the consequences of a slide often depend on where the avalanche takes you. Think about what terrain is below you. Being swept into obstacles like trees account for avalanche deaths each year. You could be pushed over a cliff or into rocks, or buried deeply in a terrain trap like a gully or stream bed, or swept into a lake, creek, or river. So, how do avalanches form in the snowpack? The snowpack builds over the course of the season, forming complex layers of strong and weak snow. Each storm and other event, like wind or warming, creates a layer in the snowpack. Even dry spells can create layers. Some layers are weak and some are strong, but it all looks the same when I am riding over it. It's this layering that is the cause of avalanches. Here we have a very strong layer over a very weak layer of cohesionless snow grains. You don't have to be a snow scientist to see that this is a bad combination. It is easy to forget about these layers when a new storm comes in and covers them with a blanket of fresh snow. Unfortunately, new snow can overload old layers until just the weight of one rider is enough to collapse the weak layer and cause an avalanche. The rider in this video is very lucky to have escaped this slab avalanche. So, what can we do? Well, before we even go out, we can set ourselves up for success by getting the right gear and getting the right training. Basic, essential avalanche rescue gear includes an avalanche transceiver, shovel, and probe. There are some other devices that can help us survive an avalanche. An avalanche airbag pack has an inflatable balloon or bladder that can help keep you on the surface of an avalanche and is rapidly becoming standard equipment. An avalon allows you to breathe in air from the snowpack and exhaust carbon dioxide behind you. Avalanche victims have survived up to an hour under the snow with an avalon. A reco chip is a reflector that is often incorporated into clothing, boots, or helmets. But remember, you need an outside professional rescue group using a specialized receiver to find you with a reco. If you are fully buried in an avalanche and lucky enough to avoid being killed from trauma, asphyxia starts to occur immediately. Your chances of survival are good if an airway is established in less than 10 minutes. At 11 to 20 minutes, most people will die from asphyxiation. After 21 minutes, anyone who survives has an air pocket of some kind. These lucky few individuals are responsible for the long tail on the survival curve. Survival prospects for fully buried victims are grim. Your best bet is to avoid being caught, and if caught, to avoid being buried. Here the victim deploys their airbag and stays on top of the debris. For those involved in a serious avalanche accident, research shows that airbags could save about half of the people who would have otherwise died. The good news, they work. The bad news, they don't work all the time. Airbags don't work very well for deep burials in a terrain trap or when the victim triggers an avalanche from below that runs right over the top of them. Additionally, a secondary avalanche could come down and bury a victim trapped on or near the surface. And, as we discussed earlier, 1 out of 4 fatal avalanche victims are killed by trauma. No equipment will work in these situations. Although it is not a perfect solution, avalanche rescue equipment is critical when traveling in avalanche terrain. It is very difficult to find someone completely buried without a transceiver. A real rescue is scary, stressful, confusing, and can happen during harsh conditions. The only way to have a reasonable chance of success is to practice regularly with your rescue gear. To put it in perspective, most professionals like guides and ski patrols practice transceiver searches once a week. Long distances, harsh mountain weather, logistics, and the time needed to gather resources mean that organized rescue will rarely arrive in time to save an avalanche victim. Avalanches are most common during and right after storms, when helicopters may be grounded and technologies like cell phones and GPSs are less likely to work. Bottom line, we can't count on outside help. You and your group are your own rescue team. So we've got the gear and we know how to use it. What else can we do? Get the training. Take a full-length field-based avalanche course. There are many public and private entities that provide avalanche training. Here in Colorado, you can visit the CAIC website to find local courses. Other resources include the American Avalanche Association and the American Institute for Avalanche Research and Education. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned developing rituals and good habits. Part of our travel ritual each day we go out should be get the forecast. We have a great resource for helping us manage the avalanche hazard, the Avalanche Forecast. All over the country, professional avalanche forecasters work hard to be natural detectives, doing tests to identify the types of avalanche problems, determining where it's safer and more dangerous to travel, identifying the clues to look for, and advising us on how to avoid the hazard that day. This is all critical information for the backcountry user. Think of it like reading the daily newspaper for anyone going into avalanche terrain in the winter. The easiest piece of information you can get from the Avalanche Advisory is the danger rating. This is a general rating of avalanche conditions. There are 5 levels: low, moderate, considerable, high, and extreme. Think of them as a stoplight. Green is go, yellow go with caution, and red light days are high danger. It's worth noting that avalanche hazard is trickiest to manage during times of moderate or considerable danger, and this is when most accidents occur. In addition to the general danger rating, if you read the rest of the Avalanche Advisory, you will get more detailed description of the hazard, where you're most likely to encounter avalanches, and what clues to look for. Avalanches tend to happen in patterns, and we use icons and graphics to communicate these on the web. Photos supplement the graphics to provide current, real-life examples. Okay, we got the forecast. Now let's get the picture. When you are out in the mountains, look around. Pay attention to your surroundings, the changing weather and snow conditions, and where you are in the terrain. Do other tracks mean the slope is safe, or did someone else just get lucky? The most obvious sign of avalanche danger is recent avalanche activity. When we're out in the backcountry, we always need to be on the lookout for avalanches. When we see recent avalanches, we need to ask ourselves, did these occur on slopes similar to where we are going? Does the slope face the same way? Is it similar in steepness and elevation? If the answer is yes, we should reevaluate our plans. Cracking or collapsing in a snowpack is another important indicator of avalanche danger. A collapse or shooting crack happens when the slab and weak layer fail, but the slope was not steep enough to slide, a sure sign of unstable snow. Winds can easily move and drift snow, leading to localized overloading of the snowpack. Even if there has not been recent snow, winds can still cause loading. Avoid wind-drifted slopes and aspects. New snow adds weight to the snowpack and stresses any weak layers that may exist. 12 inches or more of snow in 24 hours is generally considered enough to cause overloading of the snowpack and an increase in avalanche hazard. Rollerballs on the snow surface are an indication of rapid warming and increasing wet snow avalanche hazard. If you start to see these signs, it is time to call it a day or move to shadier slopes. So now we know how to spot signs of avalanche danger. How do we get out of harm's way? One way is to stay out of the way of avalanches coming down from above. Minimize your group's exposure to the hazard by crossing suspect slopes one at a time. In the picture on the left, you may be tempted to ride up and help your buddy, but you shouldn't put two sleds on the same avalanche slope at the same time. You are responsible for your actions in avalanche terrain. Are you exposing others to risk without their consent? For example, are there parties below you or on an adjacent slope that might get caught in an avalanche that you trigger? The top photo is of a skier-triggered slide that hit US 550 in Colorado and closed the road for over 7 hours. The bottom photo is of a snowboard-triggered avalanche on Mount Jumbo near Missoula, Montana. This avalanche ran into a neighborhood below the slope, killing one resident who was in her home at the time. This group of snowmobilers is not staying out of harm's way. Notice that the entire group is facing uphill with engines off in the runout zone. Best practice would be to not park in the runout zone at all, but if you must, facing downhill with the engines running gives everyone a fighting chance to escape in the event that the slope slides. Remember, anyone who recreates in the mountains in the winter is at risk for avalanches. So if you want the goods, get the gear, get the training, get the forecast, get the picture, and get out of harm's way. This is how the pros roll. I encourage you to explore the CAIC website. There are many resources for the backcountry user. Today's presentation was an avalanche awareness course. Now it is time to take the next step in your avalanche education with a field-based course. You can find field-based avalanche courses by visiting the Education tab on the CAIC website. Once again, a big thanks to all our sponsors for making this program possible.